Mhm.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Align, where we help you live your best life by being your true self, aligning with others, and aligning with your desired outcome. So today is actually very, both Ajay and I are very passionate about this topic of courageous men, and came about in different ways. Ajay has been living in San Francisco for some time. I've been living in New York, but I spend time in New York, California, and like the coastal cities. And we've been sharing and seeing the same theme. So, Ajay, do you want to give a little bit of background on what you're seeing? Well, why we're talking about courageous men today?
Yeah, so this is just something I've anecdotally noticed. In trying to, set up my friends with amazing partners, I started to notice I have a lot of amazing single women friends.
Yeah.
And I feel like I don't know men who I think are qualified or, at the emotional level to meet those amazing women and have great partnerships with them. And when I started digging a little deeper and asking people, friends, what they were finding, um you know I realized that we have this crisis where we have a, what I feel is a lack of courageous and vulnerable men in society today.
Mm-hmm.
um and I think that's a really dangerous thing.
How do you define courageous men? What makes a man courageous?
Well, I think courageous men, they're in touch with their emotions. They're able to they've often lived through experiences. They I'd say a few places to find high EQ men are going through war, building a business, playing team sports, playing individual sports at a very high level. Or you can also learn it from family, like sisters and parents.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and, with the, I guess you could say, America hasn't been valuing the family unit as much the last 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of kids are being raised in single parent households. And in particular, the father figure is the most often absent.
Mm-hmm.
So whether you're a little girl or a little boy, um, you know, half of those kids are growing up where one parent is noticeably absent during during their child years.
Yeah. Yeah. To your point about the American like culture, society, family unit, one thing I've noticed is I lived in Prague, I've lived in London, and I'm a Chinese by background, so I'm Hong Kongese. So, growing up with Asian value background, having lived in Europe and then technically growing up as an American through and through, I've definitely noticed that American men are not allowed, or basically taught from a young age, emotions are not okay. Like you can't cry. There's no room for negative emotions. The only emotions you can feel while you're young is anger, sense of adventure, and then as you grow up, when you throw in after puberty and you start mingling with women, you're not really allowed to feel, like you're not taught to embrace your emotional feelings, like love, but it's okay to feel lust. So I hear that, and I actually other feelings that also get sidebarred and you're not allowed to feel is fear, shame. So kind of along with your point, just been a shutdown of these emotions, and yes, and we see that as you progress in your career, progress in your life, because you were never taught how to feel, handle, or be allowed to have these emotions, we're seeing the inability to be in touch with that side of yourself as you get older.
Yes, and it's creating a leadership crisis in families and in corporations. Um, and if the only emotions you can feel you are lust, anger, and adventure, um, it's a hard way to navigate society,
Hmm.
especially in this era where you have Me Too and the need to learn anti-racism,
Yeah.
and um, and so I'm also seeing a crisis where these movements are actually creating high anxiety levels and panic among people who are, well, they're essentially shutting down. So Me Too actually caused a lot of men to stop asking women out.
Hmm. Yeah.
um,
Even do business together, right? Like I've definitely, and
yeah,
I want to speak for finance, what I grew up in and more familiar with, but there are plenty of my peers who says just like, I'd rather just like, I don't know, meet them broad daylight, 2 p.m. I don't even want to be alone with them. I want to make sure guys there. I'm not willing to get a lunch or be outside the office. I want them to come to the office. So I agree with you. It's swung the other way where well-behaving men are actually don't know what to do. Like, do I hold the door? Do I invite her to lunch? Like, can I speak to her? Yeah, I hear you.
yeah, yeah, and so this creates this dynamic that at best is avoidant and anxious,
Mm,
right? And, and we can go into attachment theory on another video, because anxious avoidant is actually an attachment style.
yeah,
Um, where at worst, you know, these men are now dangerous to the women,
mm,
um, and creating all sorts of problems for themselves and their businesses or other people's businesses.
mm,
And these men are stuck. They don't really know how to get out of this. There's
yeah.
some sort of cycle that they're in.
Right. Because the issue is if you've never, to your point, the lack of a father figure, for example, right? That at least one that knows how to handle their emotions. As a child, you learn by example. So
Mm-hmm.
to your point, the times when I've seen men who have that EQ and the ability to be, showing their feelings and embracing their feelings, right? The good and the bad is you mentioned like wartime, team sports, and also when they have a mother or a sister who they can look to as an example, right? So
And
oftentimes,
ask questions too.
yes, exactly. And if they feel safe, if their parents and their family create a safe space for them to ask questions, agree. So we talked about this a little bit, Ajay, but when you look at movies and you
Mm-hmm.
look at the villain,
Mm-hmm.
how is he or she created? And it's a little bit about the courageous thing too. So, kind of,
They're usually created from projecting pain. So they have experienced painful moments. They're sort of, and then they're reacting to that pain rather than feeling their way through the pain, processing the pain, and um, you know, intentionally choosing to act from a place of love and kindness,
right, right.
right? Um, and so, you know,
And then
well,
on the flip side, so you have the villain. On the flip side, when you
mm-hmm,
look at the hero has gone through stuff. They just leverage their pain as a way for them to succeed. So it really
mm-hmm,
comes down to the meaning that you attach to things, right? The hero could easily be like, oh, like screw this, this happened to me, I'll be the villain. But oftentimes, all the times, the hero actually uses the pain as fuel to get them
yep,
where they want to be, which just shows that whether you're a heroine or the villain, heroine, whether you're the hero or the villain, it's not so much what happens to you, but how you react to it and the meanings that you've attached to the things that have happened to you.
yes,
Yeah.
and you've got to feel it to heal it.
Hmm.
And I said this quote last time, and now I can reference who it's from. Every story has a happy ending. It depends on where you choose to end the story.
Yep.
That quote's from T.S. Eliot.
Nice. Awesome. I love that quote. We talked about this a little bit. You mentioned it is dangerous to have men that lack courage.
Hmm.
where do you see that it's the most dangerous to have uncourageous men?
I'd say a one-on-one personal relationship between men and women, and or also men and other men too. I mean, I'd say domestic violence is one of the biggest places where this
Right, right.
is dangerous. And so for the men that are not allowing themselves to feel pain, fear, um, anxiety, and the spectrum of negative emotions, we're seeing them do everything from leading companies badly by essentially using fear and manipulation to dominate their coworkers and put coworkers in approval seeking mode,
Yeah,
to doing that to their wives, girlfriends, boyfriends, whomever,
yeah,
um, to becoming pedophiles.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, right. I'd say pedophilia is probably one of the uh, ultimate destinations that these men will end up in if they are, lacking courage.
Hmm. Yeah.
It
And
just,
good.
yeah, and or sex trafficking.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The hard part is that when someone doesn't hasn't learned how to be, embrace their emotions, like a lot of men don't even know that they're doing it, right? They don't even know, like you explain some very dangerous, like very extreme cases, and that definitely is a byproduct of men who are unable to feel their feelings. But even on like the other end of the spectrum, right, just simply men who don't know how to be in a relationship, right? They don't know, when women get frustrated with them, like, oh, I don't know how you feel, or oh, like I don't know how you're thinking, or you're so close, all this stuff. Men get frustrated too because they think, well, what am I doing wrong? Like they don't even know what they're doing wrong because they've never seen an example, right? So
mm-hmm.
one thing I would say within romantic relationships, heterosexual romantic relationships, for the women, you know, we also need to do our part too. So there's
Yes.
so many times that I hear so many of my peers and girlfriends say, I want a guy who's emotionally open with me, who can be vulnerable with me, listen to my feelings and all that stuff, right? When the moment comes and he is really real with you and he tells you his biggest fears and his deepest secrets and all these things, and as a woman, if you freeze or shut him down, you basically train him to not open up again because you give him negative
Yeah.
beliefs.
Then the man mirrors that and freezes and shuts down.
Exactly. Exactly.
Right. So emotions have a mirroring phenomenon,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and if the guy has been in a previous relationship where he's been, you know, received with a woman who has frozen or shut him down, there's a higher probability that in his next relationship he'll share less.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
It's so true because I think about whether it be men or women, the constant things I tell a lot of my peers and my clients is don't let your past lover pay for, sorry, don't let your current lover pay for the pain that your past lover has given to you. Right. And that's what
Yes.
happens. You carry and you hold on to this baggage. You don't know any other way. So when, I highly always encourage women that when a man opens up to you, listen and create a safe space to them. You don't need to respond immediately if you don't know how to, but like running away from it, shutting him down, not only does it, destroys your relationship, you actually create a negative feedback loop for all his other relationships as well.
Yes.
And we talked a little bit about the workspace too. So if you think about, especially through COVID, you see, jobs are being lost, people are leaving, a lot of people are leaving their jobs. And if you take a look at turnover, at least within any company, it could be a huge corporation, it could be smaller teams. The number one reason people leave is not just money, it's culture. It's culture.
Yeah. Yeah. And culture. There's a famous quote that culture eats strategy for lunch.
Mm,
Right. So then, how do you establish great work culture? That also comes from creating psychologically safe spaces led with joy and unity, and courage and vulnerability and celebration are part of that whole
mm,
emotional spectrum. that's necessary to lead with success, and then the other leadership style, which these same men would fall into who cannot feel their negative feelings, is fear, manipulation, you know, guilt, shame, and blame.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, these companies have done some horrible things too. I mean, you know, their Uber self-driving car team killed someone, you know, not so long ago. There were
Mm-hmm.
many ways to have prevented that. um, you know, it's and the funny thing is that once your culture shifts, so it's fairly easy within a small organization to build it right from the get-go.
Yes.
It's and then you know, and you can keep building a larger organization that way, especially if you're you know a core team can function as an immune system to kind of filter out the people that aren't aligned with
Mm-hmm.
you know your values and your culture. um, but as the company gets larger, these larger companies, when you if you're going into a company where there's like a number of teams that are you know leading with this fear and manipulation style,
Mm-hmm.
fixing that after the fact is really difficult.
Yeah, I agree. It takes one bad egg to really penetrate.
Yeah, because they start recruiting more,
Yes.
right? So you know the emotional energy state that you're at is also the emotional energy state that you're going to attract,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you know as a result, those organizations recruit more of the people that are you know not able to feel pain. So what happens when they miss a deadline? You know they might lie about it.
Yep. Yep.
Right, they might lie about the reasons. They might say, oh, it'll be done tomorrow, when in reality they need to redo something that will take 6 months.
Yep. Yep.
Right.
I agree. And especially with, hashtag Me Too movement, a lot of the social issues that we're seeing through this year and even earlier this year, you're seeing a lot of companies starting to embrace the need for these kind of conversations. And I honestly think,
Hmm.
especially larger
They
corporations.
need to do the opposite. You can't erase the need for those conversations. You need to dig deep and go into those
Yeah.
conversations.
Yeah. And I feel a lot of these large corporations, especially the large ones, but smaller ones as well, they need a like chief culture officer, right? There's a lot of things where HR has its function, but I mean it's even beyond that. It's going deeper, right? It's having these not just about
Well,
it's not
most people are terrified of HR. You know, getting sent to HR
yeah,
is is one of the most fear-inducing things for the employee.
right.
Right. It's very rare that when you get sent to HR, it's a good conversation for you as the employee.
Right. I mean that's
Right.
because that's what they've
And
been trained to
right,
experience.
they're trained in risk reduction and risk mitigation and liability reduction.
Right.
What they're not trained in is encouragement of courage and vulnerability
Yeah.
as the actual path through hard problems,
Mm-hmm.
right? And and they kind of create the opposite of a psychologically safe space oftentimes.
I agree. Because I think of HR, I mean, of course, we're all generalizing here, but HR is in a way like a cop for the firm versus a chief a culture officer or even like an in-house life coach is you're hiring someone who feels like they're the cheerleader or the actual coach supporting the employees, right? Because the whole point of the culture is employees need to feel safe to be their authentic selves, right?
And one of the best coaches that everyone knows on TV is the character Wendy Rhodes on
Yeah,
Billions,
that's exactly what I'm talking
right?
about. Wendy.
And you know, I don't know if most people know this, but I actually have a friend who knows the real life firm that show is modeled off of, and I love that show, but also like honestly, more companies could benefit from like having a Wendy Rhodes on staff,
For sure. I
right?
agree.
And in absence of being able to afford that, more companies would benefit from the CEO basically being able to do that as one of his or her jobs in a small organization in the meantime.
That's a good point. But I think the issue of that is, right, like oftentimes, sometimes firms sees Wendy as an expense versus they don't realize, wait, if people keep leaving, the time and energy to train, retrain, hire, get recruiters is way more. And it also looks bad, right? Like if you're a firm that has investors, having a high turnover rate is a huge red flag.
Absolutely, right? And not only for investors, it's a huge red flag for customers. Are you ever going to ship your product if new people keep coming in that have to be trained?
Right, right.
Yeah.
I'm with you on that. So how do we break the cycle? How do
So,
we end this? Go ahead.
I think this, and this is something I believe anyone who's 4 years old or older is capable of doing,
Yeah.
which is start with labeling your feelings and then feel your feelings and feel all of your feelings, the positive ones and the negative ones, and label them
Mhm.
and make sure you have a safe space to talk about them.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I think women oftentimes have a better, call it, tribe where they can share. First of all, they feel more comfortable sharing their feelings, right? And then they're always talking about their feelings. Like, I know plenty of you ladies out there have like endless group chats that are just going throughout the day, and men don't have the same support system where they can talk about their feelings openly, not just the superficial stuff, but when things are really bad and you just need someone to talk
Mm.
about through the case scenarios, it's hard to have that. So one thing I highly encourage men to do is like create what I call romantic man caves, or like romantic mature fraternities where it's a group of, I don't know, 4 to 10 guys that you trust, you can go to for things like this, to sharing feelings. It could be work, it could be personal, it could be your love life, it could be fitness, it could be anything. But men just need to be there for each other, that in the emotional sphere.
Yes, and I think it's important to note that previously you were just mentioning that women were shutting men down, perhaps inadvertently.
Mhm.
Another common thing that happens is men shut each other down,
That's a good point. Yeah. Yep.
right? And you know, they're like, "Oh, your problem's not so bad. Let's go out drinking.
Yeah.
Oh, your problem's not so bad. Let's go play video games.
That's true.
Oh, your problem's not so bad. Let's go build this house
Yeah.
or build this yard or you know." So and then the typical activities for men is doing something
Mm.
with another guy, right? And but talking about something, you know, it's not that common
Yeah, I agree.
to get together to talk about something.
Hmm.
It's much more common to get together to do something.
Yeah.
And then if you're constantly doing and you're not feeling, if you're constantly watching football games instead of feeling your feelings, well, you're drowning it out the same way as the person who's drinking a bunch of beer to, prevent feeling their feelings.
Hmm. Yeah. And we like we always say, you got to feel it to heal it, right? So as someone that has always been so fearful of negative emotions, because I just felt like, how dare I feel negative emotions? I should be so grateful for my life, and I'm not going to sit here and dwell. Thing that I've learned is, if you jump the piece of the healing, the feel it to heal it, and you just act, it's going to bottle up, it's going to multiply. And when you actually feel it a month, a year, 5, 10 years later, it will explode. And so I hear you. I think we highly encourage men. Like, I don't need you to go over the guy's place and sit there and talk about your feelings for an hour unless you need it. But like sometimes like a quick phone call with one of your guy friends, or having a quick group chat for like 15, 20 minutes, you just need a reset, right? And on the other hand, as a guy or as a girl, when you hear, if you're in a honored spot where someone's willing and open to share their true feelings with you, all you could do is just listen, right? Like,
And that's a sacred spot. You have to
exactly.
honor that spot.
Yeah.
Um, and it's important not to shut them down or attack them for sharing that spot. In fact, if you are the person that attacks them, then you are being manipulative, and
Mhm.
you need to, monitor yourself for that. And that's a lesson to, take in for yourself.
Mm. I agree. I agree. And we keep mentioning hashtag Me Too. We keep mentioning the social unrest that we've been seeing. There's also No Shave November. We've seen the past, call it 5 years, a really higher awareness and escalation of how these issues are so important, that we want to build more vulnerable, courageous men. Because the biggest the definition of courage is to really be vulnerable and be able to be yourself. So I personally see that there is a huge pathway for us to explore this even more in the upcoming decade, starting now, early, like 2021. Do you see the same kind of support in wave where there's more mindfulness around this topic?
um I would say that I see a schism in America right now.
Mm,
I'd say half of the tribe is with you, Jessica, and the other half is going the other direction.
that's a good point. Yeah.
Right? So one half of it is like, yeah, we're feeling our feelings, we're doing the work, we're willing, and the other half is running away from their feelings, running for the hills, and just continuing to do and not feel.
Mm, mm, yeah.
Right?
And
And one of the most important things I've learned in discussing in knowing whether I will be effective with someone else in terms of helping them out is, checking their willingness. Right? If they are unwilling, they will not change. That's
yep,
true for men and women.
yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah, yeah. And to your point, the whole idea of being courageous is just not also being alignment with who you really are, which is your true nature is aware that this life is super abundant. There's no need. There's your soul, right? That believes
mhm.
in abundance, sees it, understands it, and then there's your ego that is led by
Yeah,
fear, right? So I think of it as like your um, monkey brain, reptile brain versus your higher brain, right? So your soul, and when you're courageous, you live in abundance, and that's your higher brain. But it's so easy and normal, and in a way, we're defaulted to think flight or flight. We're defaulted to live in fear to protect you, because all your ego wants to do is keep you alive, right? So it is definitely an active practice to always
mhm.
check yourself and saying, am I being courageous? Am I being authentic? Or am I living in fear and an ego?
Right. First thing to remember is, of course, courage is hard. So if it's not feeling hard, you might not be being courageous,
Right.
right? It's hard. As you decide to be courageous, you will probably feel anxiety. The first time you do it, you might feel like you're having a panic attack,
Yep.
um, because your anxiety level will be very, very high. You might be afraid of rejection. You might be afraid uh, of the other person threatening or attacking you.
Mhm.
Um, and that's why it's so important to, practice this,
Yeah.
right? You have to really make it part of your way of life. Another thing, sort of related to this, is social media.
Mhm.
It's actually monetized through outrage,
Yep.
right? So they make 10 times as much money off of outrageous posts than they do off of like puppy dogs and cats, although they still make a fairly large amount of money off of cute pets. But they still actually make 10 times as much money on an outrageous political post
Mhm.
as they do on a cute dog.
Mhm.
And so if you're aware of that, you know, I think either doing a complete social media detox every, to also literally like just deciding who you follow with intention and unfollow the people who are posting these outrageous things. And like actually you can also train Facebook, for example, to not show you ads. So keep training it to not show you outrageous ads. And I got it to the point where shortly before the election I was shown no political ads from August to November. I literally like trained their algorithm to do that. And for me that was mentally freeing, because it means when I logged into Facebook I saw puppy dogs and children and cars and AI, and not so many. I didn't really see any political posts anymore, which was fantastic.
Yeah. So that's the thing. Funny that you say that, because I love Instagram. I'm on it a lot. The beautiful thing about, to your point, social media is you get to pick who you choose to follow, right? It's a nice, again, it's a special curated news feed. That's what it is, right? So
Right.
being very mindful and aware, like every time you look at something, like there's a motive behind every post, right? Especially if it's, paid by someone else, if it's a corporation, it's not just like one of your friends, right, who are trying to broadcast their life. Be mindful of the intentions and the motives behind every post, that when you have that outrage, like ask yourself, is this the reaction they wanted of me? And
Also, is this how I want to feel right now? And if the
yeah,
answer is no, unfollow, train
yeah,
the algorithm.
right.
If the AI, you have the power to retrain the social media algorithm.
Yep. You always just see more of what you follow. I agree. I've actually, like, for me, I love social media because I follow what I want, and every day I wake up with inspiration. Like every day I wake up with inspirational quotes, things that I like life coaches that I want to follow, people who have like practical tips and tricks to actually progress your career, your business, your relationships. So again, take the courage to audit your Instagram, so you're not an outrage, and rather social media controlling you, you're controlling social media.
I have an idea of something we can do for our audience.
What is that? I like the idea.
How about we both share in the description for this podcast
Mhm.
5 Instagram handles we love to follow?
Oh, that's easy. Okay, got it. I feel like we might overlap, which is fine.
Well, we'll
Yeah,
check with each other and we'll pick another 5 so that there's overall at least 10 to
right.
follow. And, these will be things that are good for your mind.
Yeah. And then we also welcome the audience, right? If there's any posts, any social media accounts that you are inspired by and it always uplifts you, please do share with the audience, because we definitely need more good news. Again, not to be just woo-woo optimistic, but it definitely trains your brain to think about how to progress versus how to go backwards. So we want
Yeah,
to.
and if if what you're seeing in your feed is doom and gloom, understand that if you don't do anything about it, it will keep showing you more doom and gloom, because it is literally trained to overbias.
Mm, yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
So you can overbias it on the happy instead of overbias it on the doom and gloom. It's all up to you.
Take control of social media. Don't let it control you. Awesome. Ajay, are there any things that you're working on related to Courageous Men that the audience can reach out to you about?
Um, so there is a project I'm working on that's at the intersection of AI and psychology, but we're keeping it tight lips on it till it's launched. But in the meantime, I'd love to have conversations with more men. Um, I'm happy to provide a safe space for them to be courageous with me and share stuff. Because I in the process of defining, call it a curriculum for what we're producing, I think these conversations could be very helpful.
I agree. Real life feedback. Awesome. Well, Ajay, I want to thank you for being a courageous man And having this courageous conversation with me, it definitely helps to have a male opinion in this. So it's not just me saying, oh, these are things that I've been seeing as a female. So I hope this was helpful for everybody. We do really care about this. Men, we need you. We need all of you, not just the beautiful side of you that you want to show to the world, and not just, one negative emotion, which is often just anger that we see. So we encourage you to be your full spectrum self and be expressive, because only when you're authentically you and you're fully you that we as women can really appreciate you for all you are. So with that, I do want to end it with another question for you, Ajay. I think you answered us last time, but if you have another one, what's your second unique gift that serves humanity?
I love to celebrate others,
Mm,
right? So I actually think one of the biggest, if you're afraid of Me Too, if you're afraid of that anti-racism discourse, if you're afraid of entering those things, there's a really easy way that you can create a safe space with women, with people
right.
of color, with all the humans, which is to celebrate them,
Mm,
right? And when you celebrate them, it puts them in a joyful state,
yeah.
right? And you have a fertile ground to create some unity with them and a psychological safe space and to have these courageous and vulnerable conversations. Um, and then you're also going to have the courage to ask out that cute girl or guy that you're anxious about and have a real date that's high quality where you can connect on so many different levels, because ultimately we're all seeking really deep, awesome connections
Mm,
with everyone, and that's why we're here.
yeah. Yeah.
Right? That's the path to the most richness we can provide for ourselves.
Right. It's funny you mentioned that. So the Wolf on Wall Street, Jordan, the main character that it's based off.
Mm-hmm.
I remember I listened to one of the podcasts with him, and I think it was Jay Shetty. Was it Jay Shetty? I think it was. It was Jay Shetty. Yeah, Jay Shetty. I'll add his link too. Love him. Love Jay. Um, Jordan shared, he was always running after empty money. And every year he had to get more and more and more and more, because once he got the money at the end of the year or whenever he was paid out, he was empty. So he figured, oh, I just have to make more and more and more and more. And it was just a treadmill that he never felt whole. And he said that it was when he lost everything, lost his relationship. I think it was his actual marriage, failed it, went to jail. And after that, when he was broke, when he found his current love of his life, that's when he came alive. That's when felt like he started living, right? Before that, he was always just kind of poking around in the dark. So to your point, even people who, like a Jordan, who was very successful in his career, it took him to reflect in jail, come out, be the love of his life, to really find meaning. So
You know, just as much as I love dogs, and dogs love to chase things, if you are constantly chasing one thing obsessively,
mm,
I mean, sometimes you get it, sometimes it's amazing, sometimes it's but if in particular, if you're constantly chasing money, it's worth looking and doing some self-reflection on why are you constantly chasing money.
mm-hmm. What type of and whose validation are you seeking? And can you give that validation to yourself so you can stop chasing and finally doing just being
you
you?
know can you celebrate yourself?
Yes, that's a good
What
one.
can you celebrate about yourself?
Mm-hmm.
Once you start celebrating yourself, that chasing things like money in particular, and power and success and fame. There's this great TV show that used to air in Britain called Lucky Man, and one of the things that it says in its opening is fame is a fickle friend,
Mm,
right? And it's really important to note that money money is a made up thing. You know, it's a made up thing to basically deal with the trading of one thing for another. Um, and, you know, it is not God, right? So God is God. Money is not God. If money is your God, at some point, life will, you know, send a train your direction. And if you don't hop on board that train hits you really hard.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, thank you, Ajay. Really appreciate it. Thank you for being courageous, man. And I hope everyone enjoyed this session, and we look forward to our next podcast together.
Thank you, Jessica.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, dear.